Hey guys, good evening. Today we're reading Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Chapter 10, Creature's Tale. Harry woke up next morning wrapped in a sleeping bag on the drawing room floor. A chink of sky was visible between the heavy curtains. It was cool, clear blue of watered ink somewhere between night and dawn, and everything was quiet except for Ron and Hermione slow, deep breathing. Harry glanced over the dark shapes that made on the floor beside them. Ron had had a fit of gallantry instead and insisted that Hermione sleep on the cushions from the sofa so that her silhouette was raised above his. Her arm curved to the floor, her fingers inches from Ron's. Harry wondered whether they had fallen asleep holding hands. The idea made him feel strangely lonely. He looked up the shadowy ceiling, the cobweb chandelier. Less than 24 hours ago, he had been standing in the sunlight on the entrance of the marquee, waiting to show in wedding guests. It seemed a lifetime away. What was going to happen now? He lay on the floor, and he thought of the Horcruxes, of the daunting, complex mission Dumbledore had left him. Dumbledore! The grief that had possessed him since Dumbledore's death felt different now. The accusations he had heard from Muriel and at the wedding seemed to have nested in his brain like diseased things, infecting his memories of the wizard he had idolized. Could Dumbledore have let such things happen? Had he been like Dudley, content to watch neglect and abuse as long as it did not affect him? Could he have turned his back on a sister who was being imprisoned and hidden? Harry thought of Godric's Hollow, of graves Dumbledore had never mentioned there. He thought of the mysterious objects left without explanation in Dumbledore's will, and resentment swelled in the darkness. Why hadn't Dumbledore told him? Why hadn't he explained? Had Dumbledore actually cared about Harry at all? Or had Harry been nothing more than a tool to be polished and honed, but never trusted, never confided in? Harry could not stand lying there with nothing but bitter thoughts for company. Despite for something to do, for distraction, he slipped out of his sleeping bag, picked up his wand, and crept out of the room. On the landing, he whispered, "Loomis," and started to climb the stairs by wand light. On the second landing was a bedroom in which he and Ron had slept last time they had been there. He glanced into it. The wardrobe doors stood open, and the bedclothes had been ripped back. Harry remembered the overturned troll leg downstairs. Somebody had searched the house since the order had left. Snape? Or perhaps Mundungus, who had pilfered plenty from the house before and after Sirius died. Harry's gaze wandered to the portrait that sometimes contained Phineas Nigellus Black, Sirius' great-grandfather, but it was empty, showing nothing but a stretch of muddy backdrop. Phineas Nigellus was eventually spending the night in the headmaster's study at Hogwarts. Harry continued up the stairs until he reached the topmost landing, where there were only two doors. The one facing him before a nameplate reading Sirius. Harry had never entered his godfather's bedroom before. He pushed open the door, holding his wand high to cast light as widely as possible. The room was spacious, and must once have been handsome. There is a large bed with a covered wooden headboard, and a tall window obscured by a long velvet curtains, and a chandelier thickly coated in dust, and candle shrubs still nesting in its sockets. Solid wax hangings in frost-like drips. A fine film of dust covered the pictures on the walls and the bed's headboard. A spiderweb stretched between the chandelier and the top of the large wooden wardrobe. And as Harry moved deeper into the bedroom, he heard a scurrying of disturbed mice. The teenage Sirius had plastered the walls with so many posters and pictures that little of the wall's silvery gray silk was visible. Harry could only assume that Sirius' parents had not had been unable to remove the permanent sticking charms that kept them on the wall, because he was sure they would not have appreciated their eldest son's taste in decoration. Sirius seemed to have gone out of his way to annoy his parents. There were several large Gryffindor banners, faded scarlet and gold, just to underline the difference between the rest of the Slytherin family. There were many pictures of Muggle motorcycles, and also, Harry had to admire Sirius's nerve, several posters of bikini-clad Muggle girls. He could tell they were Muggles because they remained quite stationary within their pictures, faded smiles and gazing eyes frozen upon the paper. This was contrast to the only wizarding photograph on the wall, which was a picture of the 4 Hogwarts students standing arm in arm, laughing at the camera. With a leap of pleasure, Harry recognized his father. His untidy black hair stuck up at the back like Harry's, and he too wore glasses. Besides him was Sirius, carelessly handsome, his slightly arrogant face so much younger and happier than Harry had ever seen it alive. To Sirius's right stood Pettigrew, more than a head shorter, plump and watery-eyed, flushed with pleasure at the inclusion of the coolest of gangs, which was much admired rebels that James and Sirius had been. On James's left was Lupin, even then a little shabby-looking, but he had the same air of delighted surprise at finding himself liked and included. Or was it simply because Harry knew how it had been, that he saw these things in the picture? He tried to take it from the wall. It was his now, after all. Sirius had left him everything, but it would not budge. Sirius had taken no chances in preventing his parents from redecorating his room. Harry looked around the floor. The sky outside was growing brighter. A shaft of light revealed bits of paper, books, and small objects scattered over the carpet. Evidently, Sirius's bedroom had been searched too, although its contents seemed to have been judged mostly, if not entirely, worthless. A few of the books had been shaken roughly enough to part company from their covers, and sundry pages littered the floor. Harry bent down, picked up a few of the pieces of paper, and examined them. He recognized one as part of an old edition of A History of Magic by Bathilda Bagshot, and another as belonging to a motorcycle maintenance manual. A third was handwritten and crumpled. He smoothed it out. Dear Padfoot, thank you for Harry's birthday present. It was his favorite, by far. 1 year old and already zooming along on a toy broomstick. He looked so pleased with himself. I'm enclosed a picture so that you can see. You know it only rises about 2 feet off the ground, but he nearly killed the cat, and he smashed a horrible vase Petunia sent me for Christmas. No complaints there. Of course, James thought it was so funny. Says he's going to be a great Quidditch player. But we've had to pack all the ornaments and make sure we don't take our eyes off of him when he gets going. We had a very quiet birthday tea, just us and old Bathilda, who was always been sweet to us and who dotes on Harry. We were so sorry you couldn't come, but the orders got to come first, and Harry's not old enough to know it's his birthday anyways. James is getting a bit frustrated shut up here. He tries not to show it, but I can tell. Also, Dumbledore's got his old invisibility cloak, so no chance of a little excursions. If you could visit, it would cheer him up so much. Wormy was here last weekend. I thought he seemed down. But that was probably the news about the McKinnons. I cried all evening when I heard. Bathilda drops in most days. She's fascinating old thing with the most amazing stories about Dumbledore. I'm sure he'd be pleased. Wait, hold on. I'm not sure he would be pleased if he knew. I don't know how much to believe, actually, because it seems incredible that Dumbledore... ... Harry's extremities seemed to have gone numb. He stood quite still, holding the miraculous paper in his nerveless fingers, while inside of him a kind of quiet eruption sent joy and grief thundering in equal measure through his veins. Lurching to the bed, he sat down. He read the letter again. He could not take in any more meaning than he had the first time, and reduced to staring at the handwriting itself. She had made her G's the same way he did. He searched through the letter for every one of them, and each felt like a friendly little wave glimpsed from behind a veil. The letter was an incredible treasure, proof that Lily Potter had lived, really lived, and that her warm hand had once moved across this parchment, tracing ink into letters. These words about him, Harry, her son. Impatiently brushing away the wetness in his eyes, he reread the letter, this time concentrating on the meaning. It was like listening to a half-remembered voice. They had had a cat. Perhaps it had perished, like his parents, at Godric's Hollow, or else fled when there was nobody left to feed it. Sirius had brought him his first broomstick. His parents had known Bathilda Bagshot? Had Dumbledore introduced them? Dumbledore still got the invisibility cloak. There was something funny there. Harry paused, pondering his mother's words. Why had Dumbledore taken James' invisibility cloak? Harry distinctly remembered that headmaster telling him years before, "I don't need a cloak to become invisible," he said. Perhaps some less gifted order member had needed its assistance, and Dumbledore had acted as a carrier. Harry passed on. Wormy was here. Pettigrew, the traitor, had seemed down, had he? Was he aware that he was seeing James and Lily alive for the last time? And finally, Bathilda again, who told incredible stories about Dumbledore. It seemed incredible that Dumbledore what? But there were any number of things it could seem incredible that Dumbledore, that he had once received bottom marks in transfiguration tests, or for instance, or had taken up goat charming like Aberforth. Harry got to his feet, scanned the floor. Perhaps the rest of the letter was somewhere here. He seized papers, treating them in his eagerness with as little consideration as the original searcher. He pulled open drawers, shut out books, stood on the chair to run his hand over the top of the wardrobe, and crawled under the bed and armchair. At last, lying face down on the floor, he spotted what looked like a torn piece of paper under the chest of drawers. When he pulled it out, it proved to be most of the photograph Lily had described in her letter. A black-haired boy was zooming in and out of the picture on a tiny broomstick, roaring with laughter. A pair of legs that must have belonged to James was chasing after him. Harry tucked the photograph into his pocket with Lily's letter and continued to look for the second sheet. After another quarter of an hour, however, he was forced to conclude that the rest of his mother's letter was gone. Had it simply been lost in the 16 years that had elapsed since he had been written, or had it been taken by whoever had searched the room? Harry read the first sheet again, this time looking for clues as to what might have happened to the second sheet. Looking for clues as to what might have made the second sheet valuable. Sorry, guys. His toy broomstick could hardly be considered interesting to the Death Eaters. The only potentially useful thing he could see here was possible information on Dumbledore. It seems incredible that Dumbledore... What? Harry! 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 I'm here! He called. What happened? There was a clutter of footsteps outside the door, and Hermione burst inside. We woke up. We didn't know where you were, she said, breathless. She turned and shouted over her shoulder, Ron! I found him! Ron's annoyed voice echoed distinctly from several floors below. Good! Tell him from me he's a git. Harry did not disappear, please. We were terrified. Why did you come up here anyways? She gazed around in the ransacked room. What have you been doing? Look what I found! He held out his mother's letter. Hermione took it and read it and watched while Harry watched her. When she read the end of the page, she looked up at him. "Oh, Harry. And there's this, too." He handed her a torn photograph. Hermione smiled at the baby zooming in and out of sight on the toy broom. "I've been looking for the rest of the letter," Harry said, "but it's not here." Hermione glanced around. Did you make all this mess, or was some of it done when you got here?" "Someone had searched before me," Harry said. "I thought so. Every room I looked into on the way up had been disturbed." "What were they after, do you think?" "Information on the Order, if it was Snape." "But you'd think he'd already have all he needed. I mean, he was in the Order, wasn't he?" "Well then," Harry said, keen to discuss his theory, "what about information on Dumbledore? The second page of this letter, for instance. You know this Bathilda my mom mentions. You know who she is?" "Who?" "Bathilda Bagshot, the author of A History of Magic," said Hermione, looking interested. "So your parents knew her. She was an incredible magical historian." "And she's still alive," Harry said, "and she lives in Godric's Hollow. Harry's Auntie Muriel was talking about her at the wedding. She knew Dumbledore's family, too. Be pretty interesting to talk to her, wouldn't she?" There's little too much understanding in the smile Hermione gave him for Harry's liking. He took back the letter and the photograph and tucked them inside the pouch around his neck, so as to not to have to look at her and give himself away. That's an interesting sentence. "I understand why you love to talk to her about your mom and your dad, and Dumbledore too," said Hermione. "But what about really help us in search for the Horcruxes, would it?" Harry did not answer, and she rushed on. "Harry, I know you really want to go to Godric's Hollow, but I'm scared. I'm scared as how easily those Death Eaters found us yesterday. It just makes me feel more than ever we ought to avoid the places where your parents were buried. I'm sure they'd expect you to want to visit." "It's not just that," Harry said, still avoiding to look at her. "Muriel said stuff about Dumbledore at the wedding. I want to know the truth." He told Hermione everything that Muriel had told him. When he had finished, Hermione said, "Of course, I can see that's upset you, Harry." "I'm not upset," he lied. I just like to know whether or not it's true. Or, Harry, do you really think you're going to get truth from a malicious old woman like Muriel or from Rita Skeeter? How do you believe them? You knew Dumbledore." "I thought I knew Dumbledore," he muttered. "But you knew how much truth there was in everything Rita wrote about you. Dodge is right. How could you let these people tarnish your memories of Dumbledore?" He looked away, trying not to betray the resentment he felt. There it was again. Chose what to believe. He wanted the truth. Why was everybody so determined that he should not get it? "Shall we go down to the kitchen?" Hermione suggested after a little pause. "Find something for breakfast?" He agreed, but grudgingly, and followed her out into the landing and past the second door that led off it. There is a deep scratch mark in the paintwork below the small sign that had not noticed in the dark. He paused at the top of the stairs to read it. It was a pompous little sign, neatly lettered by hand, a sort of thing that Percy Weasley might have stuck to his bedroom door. Oh, sorry. "Do not enter without the express permission of Regulus Arcturus Black." Excitement trickled through Harry, but he was not immediately sure why. He read the sign again. Hermione was already a flight of stairs down below. "Hermione," he said, and he was surprised that his voice was so calm. "Come back up here." "What's the matter? R.A.B., I think I found him. There was a gasp, and Hermione ran back up the stairs. It's your mom's letter, but I didn't see. Harry shook his head, pointing to Regulus's sign. She read it, and then clutched Harry's arm so tightly that she winced. Sirius's brother, she whispered. He was a Death Eater, said Harry. Sirius told me about him. He joined up when he was really young and got bit of cold feet and tried to leave. So they killed him. That fits, gasped Hermione. If he and the Death Eaters had had access to Voldemort, and if he'd become disenchanted, that he would have wanted to bring Voldemort down. She released Harry, leaned back over the banister, and screamed, Ron! Ron! Get up, quick! Harry appeared, panting a minute later, his wand ready in his hand. What's up? If it's a mass of spiders again, I want breakfast before He frowned at the sign on Regulus's door to watch Hermione was silently pointing. What? That was Sirius's brother, wasn't it? Regulus Arcturus Black? R.A.B.! The locket, do you reckon? Let's find out, said Harry. He pushed open the door. It was locked. Hermione pointed her wand at the handle and said, Alohomora. There was a click and the door swung open.